One of these two programs has established itself as the gold standard in college football since going back to Nick Saban's second year at Alabama in 2008, while the other team has definitely established itself as the only undefeated team and consensus number one team since the College Football Playoff Committee started to rank these teams across the country. We bring in Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to break down the final game of the season to determine the winner of the 2015 National Championship, Clemson and Alabama. Mike, I think we should start with the best player possibly on the field in Deshaun Watson taking on what has become a notorious wrecking crew of a front seven of a defense. That should be something to watch.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be, for Deshaun Watson, it's going to need to be his best performance of the season. This is the most talented defense he has faced, top to bottom. The front seven of Alabama is no joke. I mean, there's a reason why Nick Saban, his defense, behind Kirby Smart and the rest of that staff, we know Kirby Smart will be leaving right after this bowl game, but Kirby Smart has established that identity on defense at Alabama that has been so repetitive year after year, and they've established that consistency on that side of the football, and they've sent so many different players to the pros because of not only the scheme, but the ability of the players within that scheme to produce at a very high level. And for Deshaun Watson, it's just as important that he runs the ball well in this game, just as well as he passes the football. We know that he's very accurate, 3,500 yards passing this year and 30 touchdowns, so only 11 picks. But rushing the football, he's a 1,000-yard rusher, and I think it's almost as important that he rushes for 100 yards in this game versus him throwing for 300 yards against this Alabama defense. Their front seven really gets after you, and it's going to be difficult for Watson to be able to throw the ball and run the football at a very high level. But I think if he runs the ball for 100 yards and combines with the talent of his very, very good running back, Wayne Gulman, it'll put some pressure on that Alabama defense that historically has had trouble stopping mobile quarterbacks.
As is typically the case in a championship game, we have the immovable force and the irresistible force going at it, and some of these numbers are going to have to give one way or the other. So I saw a few things here that are pretty interesting in that Deshaun Watson is protected to the point where he has pressured the second lowest of any quarterback in the country, while Alabama pressures quarterbacks in the top 5 in the country. It's also interesting to note, with all that explosion on the outside for Clemson, that Alabama is 41-1 when they do not allow a passer to complete a touchdown pass of over 20 yards. Only 8-5, though, when a quarterback is able to complete a touchdown pass of over 20-plus yards and open up the passing game against Alabama. Alabama has not allowed a quarterback, Mike, to rush for more than 29 yards this season, and we've seen what Deshaun Watson has done in the stretch drive for Clemson when he is needed to use his feet, and rushed for 145 yards against Oklahoma, 100 yards plus in 5 of 6 games down the stretch. I think the difference between this Alabama defense and the top 5 type defenses we've seen in recent years, and this one that is, by most standards, far and away the best defense in the country, is they've developed a pass rush. So they typically are just rock solid across the board and just have 2 tackles that just anchor the line and don't let you run. And now they have two or three speedy rush ends that are just incredible. And Tim Williams with 9.5 sacks, Jonathan Allen 12 sacks, Ryan Anderson with double-digit tackles for loss. So they've added that to the tackles that again are just almost immovable. Which brings me to Wayne Gulman, who's an appreciated back across the country, but kind of had a breakout game, at least in terms of a national perspective, against Oklahoma with $150 on the ground, and really showed me something in the running game. But running against Oklahoma, running against Alabama are 2 different things, but Clemson's at least going to have to try, Mike.
Yeah, they're definitely going to have to try. And, like we kind of spoke about there at length, I mean, Deshaun Watson is really going to have to run to the best of his abilities, because with Alabama's defense swarming the way they have and the way they've suffocated those quarterbacks, it's going to be very difficult. And as far as Clemson, on the other side of the ball, with Alabama running the football with Derrick Henry and the Heisman Trophy winner, I mean, it's just as paramount that Clemson stops the run just as much as Alabama stops Clemson's run, because I think that's kind of going to be the story of the game, is how these two defenses stop the run first. Because Jake Coker, for Alabama, we know he's comfortable throwing the football, but he's not as comfortable when he has a lot of pressure. And I think Clemson will be able to dial up the pressure if they're able to slow down Derrick Henry. So I think the story of both teams running the football against each opposing defense is paramount to who wins this game, which should be very close throughout.
Mike, I'm going to make three distinctions in the Clemson offense over the Michigan State offense. Michigan State was a disastrous recipe versus Alabama, because Connor Cook obviously doesn't have the feet that Deshaun Watson does. He's going to be an NFL quarterback, going to be highly successful, but you got him in the pocket, and that's where he's going to stay, and he's going to have to beat you with throwing down the field. Deshaun Watson, obviously the dual threat, a dynamic player. That's one huge difference. Number two is that Michigan State, known for running the ball in past years, Le'Veon Bell, Jeremy Langford, but they really didn't have a good rushing attack this year. It would surprise people that they had the worst of the rushing attacks among the four playoff teams. So Clemson, a better running team than Michigan State. And then also with Aaron Burbridge, Michigan State may have had the best wide receiver of the group, but Clemson's got 4 or 5 impact guys at wide receiver that are more dynamic, 4 and 5 deep on the wide receiver core than Michigan State could bring. And I think that's where Alabama might be vulnerable, and Clemson's going to have to hit on some big plays downfield.
Yeah, definitely. And all starts with Kaiba Scott. A big-time year for him, 84 catches, over 800 yards, and 5 touchdown receptions. And, a lot of people thought that Clemson was going to be in a lot of trouble this season when they lost Mike Williams in the opener to that neck injury. But there were a lot of guys that were able to step up in his absence. It starts with Kaiba Scott. But as you go down the list, Sharon Peake, who battled injuries throughout most of his Clemson career, stepped up in a big way this season. 44 catches, 617 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He was tied for second on the team with 3 other guys at the 5 touchdown catch mark, but he was second on the team by himself in receiving yards, and he was a guy that really had to emerge, because once Mike Scott was lost to the injury, Kaiba Scott was going to be elevated to that number 1 receiver role, and we knew that Clemson would have to have another guy emerge, and Sharon Peake was the one guy on the Clemson offense at the receiver position that was kind of going to be flying under the radar a bit just because of his injury history, but he was highly touted coming out of high school, and he had a lot of talent, all the talent in the world to make the leap and, to be a very productive player when healthy. And, he showed this year that he had that ability. Additionally, Clemson had a couple tight ends that were very productive. Deon Cain, which they kind of characterize as a receiver. Now, he's going to be out for the national championship. He missed their last game against Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl due to a violation of team rules. A lot of rumors that it was drug-related, but he was sent home. And Deon Cain, he'll learn from this mistake, but he had a very good freshman year for them, 34 catches for 582 yards and 5 touchdowns. I know it won't mean much in the national championship, but he does need to be mentioned because he was a big reason why the Clemson offense was as good as they were in the passing game this year, for him to emerge as he did as a freshman, listed as a tight end, but split out and played a lot of receiver. Jordan Leggett was the one tight end, the true tight end on their roster. He also played a little bit in the slot, but he was mostly a guy that would line up on the line of scrimmage there with the rest of the offensive line, and he would go out and catch passes just as efficiently as Deon Cain. He actually had one more catch than Cain did, 35 catches on the season for 447 yards and a team-leading 7 touchdowns. So there's no shortage of targets on the team. There are a lot of guys on the list that make a lot of different, that have a lot of different ways that they can produce. Ray McLeod is a guy that's rushed the ball. He's also been receiving, has emerged as a receiver, 28 catches for 244 yards and a touchdown. He's very quick. They line him up all over the field, and he's the guy that, could fly under the radar just a bit and make a difference in this game for Clemson if you want to go outside of the big names that they have at receiver. So Clemson's got no shortage of guys there for Deshaun Watson to throw to, that's for sure.
Mike McDaniel joining us from inside the ACC. Mike, one of the key matchups we talked about last week was Mackenzie Alexander at corner against Sterling Shepard of Oklahoma. Shepard caught 7 passes, but they didn't amount to a whole lot. He caught the football, he got tackled, didn't make any big plays against Alexander. It'll be interesting to see if Dabo Swinney and Brent Venables have the same tactic against Calvin Ridley, who made the first huge play of the Michigan State game with a like a 45-yard touchdown reception to break that game open at 10-0. Ridley caught 83 passes for 7 touchdowns this year as a freshman. He is one of the guys to look out for as a dark horse candidate for the Heisman Trophy next year. It'll be interesting again to see if Alexander is locked on Ridley or if he's just playing a side of the field, and whether it's Ridley or Darius Stewart with 61 catches, he's just going to deal with one side of the field, but that's going to be huge.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's all going to start up front with Shaq Lawson, his health. We saw him leave the game against Oklahoma very early in the first quarter with a knee injury. Didn't appear to be too serious. He is practicing this week, but if Clemson has him up front and they can get some pressure on Jake Coker, that would go a long way to determining how effective or ineffective Calvin Ridley is receiving the football for Alabama, because when Jake Coker gets back there, has time to throw, and he's comfortable, he can find Ridley and he can take the cover off the defense. As a freshman, 893 yards and 5 touchdowns, and he's the next big-time receiver at Alabama. You know, they go down the list from Julio Jones to Amari Cooper. We've seen it year after year. Alabama always has one big-time receiver that they can go to, and Calvin Ridley, as a freshman, has already emerged as that kind of player. So I think Mackenzie Alexander, if he does very similar to what he did and what the scheme was against Oklahoma, where they kind of just let Sterling Shepard catch the football but made sure to wrap him up. Because Shepard was a type of guy very similar to Calvin Ridley in this regard, in that they catch the football, catch almost everything that is thrown at them, but then they can make that play with their feet after the catch, get those yards after the reception, and turn it up the field and turn a short passing play into a big-time play that breaks the cover off the defense, ends up turning into a scoring touchdown that could decide a football game. So I think Clemson is going to maneuver a similar game plan. I'm sure they'll change it up a little bit because Nick Saban is just so good with his coaching staff at scheming against opponents and seeing what they've done in the weeks prior. I'm sure there will be a little bit different scheme-wise, but I think the overall idea will be the same, because Mackenzie Alexander had such great success in slowing down Sterling Shepard and corralling him and not letting him get any big plays. And I think it's going to be very important in this game for Mackenzie Alexander to do something extremely similar against Calvin Ridley.
You mentioned the impact of Shaq Lawson. He's got a decision to make. He's got an NFL future. He's got a combine to deal with, NFL draft status. He has a knee injury. And does he play in the national championship game, and how much does he play? Almost impossible to replace the most explosive player on the field at the defensive end position. 23 tackles for loss and 10 sacks. Guys like B.J. Goodson with 91 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, and Kevin Dodd, who's an exceptional talent himself, with 15 tackles for loss, going to have to be even more of an impact against the Alabama running game and Derrick Henry in particular, and also get heat on Jake Coker. Now, the advantage here, kind of like the Cook versus Watson comparison, is that they're not going to have to chase around Baker Mayfield this week. It's going to be Jake Coker, who we're not going to sell him short, because he can break contain and make some plays with his feet, but he's not going to run away from anyone. But Jake Coker has certainly shown himself capable of breaking contain, and he's a threat downfield, and he's got to keep the defense honest. And he's coming off his best game of the season on a 25 for 30, barely let the ball hit the turf, in completing 83% of his plays. So, Mike, we got Alabama, we got Clemson, we've got an Alabama defense that seems to be the best in the country, but against the best possible player in the country in Deshaun Watson, and the Shaq Lawson issue looming as well.
Yeah, so going into this game, like you said, there are a lot of different storylines. Alabama's defense against Clemson's offense, Clemson's defense against Alabama's offense, specifically Derrick Henry and Calvin Ridley. Those are the two players for Alabama that Clemson absolutely needs to slow down to win this game. I think what it's really going to come down to is how much pressure is Clemson going to be able to get on the quarterback, because we don't know for sure how healthy Shaq Lawson is going to be. While he may play for this game, overall, ultimately we don't know how healthy he's going to be. But if he's 80-85%, he can put some pressure on the quarterback, and maybe even more importantly, stop the run game of Derrick Henry, which nobody has really seemed to figure out this season. I just think it's really important for Clemson's defense to kind of put their foot on the gas pedal and do whatever they can to kind of sell out on the run, and then hope Mackenzie Alexander can win his one-on-one matchup with Calvin Ridley. I think if that happens, Clemson has a great chance to win the game. Ultimately, this is going to be one of those games is going to be pretty close throughout. In my opinion, it'll be one of the better national championships played in the last couple seasons, just because I know the talent that Clemson has on offense, and they're the type of team that has caused Alabama's defense from time to time to struggle. I think we saw it in recent years with quarterbacks like Johnny Manziel, Dak Prescott, guys that are mobile but can also throw the football at a very high rate. I mean, out of all three of those quarterbacks I just mentioned, I think the most talented, without a doubt, is Deshaun Watson, the guy that, Alabama is going to play next. So while it's going to be a very, very close game, I'm going to take Alabama to win, just because nobody really has proven that they can stop Derrick Henry this year. And with Clemson's star defensive lineman questionable to play, and even if he does go, I'm not sure he's going to be close to 100%. And even with him in the lineup, how effective is Clemson going to be stopping Derrick Henry for all 4 quarters? I mean, there's a reason why he won the Heisman Trophy. He's a guy that really wears down opponents late in games. So if this thing gets to be, a 6 to 10 point game late with Alabama leading, they're just going to hand the ball to Derrick Henry and let him go. And I'm just not confident that Clemson is going to be able to stop him, just because I'm not really sure there's another team out there really that can stop Derrick Henry, in all honesty. And I think Jake Coker, like you said, he's not the most mobile guy in the world, but he can make some plays with his feet. I think he'll break contain a couple times, pick up a couple of big first downs with his feet, and I think he'll have a good game throwing the football. And while Calvin Ridley might not necessarily have the game of his life just because of who's covering him, I still think he'll make a play or two in the passing game that will ultimately make a difference. Deshaun Watson, Clemson's offense will show up, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to score enough points against Alabama's defense to win this game, because at the end of the day, Alabama's got the best running back in the country, and he's a guy that changes games not only with his speed but with his power, and that wears you down for 4 quarters. So long story short, I'm going to take Alabama in a very close game.
So this is the best offense that Alabama's faced this season. So we talk about the Alabama defense being the best anybody has faced, but they're going to have to deal with the best offense they've seen. You allude to Josh Dobbs of Tennessee, and most notably Dak Prescott of Mississippi State, the closest comparisons we have in regards to dual threat quarterbacks, but neither one of them as good as Deshaun Watson. So I think Clemson does score some points in this game. It's not going to be what we saw last season, because the Clemson offense is too dynamic. It's going to be extremely difficult, I think, for Clemson to run the ball against the Alabama front seven, regardless of what Watson does in the passing game. They're going to make sure that they become one-dimensional. On the flip side, Alabama, wears you down with Derrick Henry. Didn't have a really productive game against Michigan State, but Alabama started to torch Michigan State. With the passing game, I don't think they're going to be as efficient or effective against this Clemson defense, because I think the secondary's better than Michigan State with Mackenzie Alexander and Cordrea Tankersley as well for Clemson. Good game, not a great game, not close to what we saw with Auburn, Florida State, anything like that. I see a 1-score game into the 3rd quarter, and then Alabama pulls away and really pounds the rock with Henry in the 4th quarter and wins this thing 34-17. All right, from Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC, this is Mark Rogers, Mark Rogers TV, and there you have it, our picks on Alabama Clemson. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks, Mark.